The confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the quality of evidence, but of the coherence of the story the mind has managed to construct. Quick reality check. How many terrible decisions have you made in the last year that seemed completely logical at the time? Your relationship choices, financial decisions, career moves, health habits. How many of them made perfect sense when you were making them, but now seem obviously stupid in retrospect? Here's what'll disturb you. Those weren't random mistakes or momentary lapses in judgment. They were the predictable result of your brain systematically lying to you about reality while making you feel completely confident in those lies. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades proving something that destroys most people's self-image. You are not a rational decision-maker who occasionally makes emotional mistakes. You are an emotional, biased, illogical creature who occasionally stumbles into rational decisions by accident. Your brain, the thing you trust most about yourself, is constantly distorting information, ignoring evidence, and creating false narratives while convincing you that its distorted version of reality is not just accurate, but obviously true. Right now you're probably thinking, but I'm pretty logical. I weigh pros and cons. I consider evidence. I'm not one of those irrational people. That thought you just had, that's your brain lying to you again. The belief that you're more rational than other people is itself an irrational bias that almost everyone has. Kahneman discovered that human reasoning isn't a truth-seeking system. It's a storytelling system designed to make you feel confident and coherent rather than accurate and correct. Your brain would rather be wrong and confident than right and uncertain. Think about your last major disagreement with someone. During that argument, how certain were you that you were right and they were wrong? How obvious did their errors seem to you? How clear was it that they were being irrational, biased, or willfully ignorant? Now here's the disturbing part. They felt exactly the same way about you, with equal confidence, based on the same evidence, using the same reasoning processes. Both of you were completely convinced that you were the rational one and the other person was deluded. Both of you felt the satisfying certainty that comes from being obviously right. Both of you were experiencing the same cognitive biases while being completely blind to your own bias and hyper-aware of the other person's bias. This is your brain on normal operation, creating compelling illusions of rationality and objectivity while systematically distorting your perception of everything that doesn't fit your existing beliefs, preferences, and self-image. The scariest part? The smarter you are, the better your brain gets at creating sophisticated justifications for its biased conclusions. Intelligence doesn't make you less biased, it makes you better at rationalizing your biases. Welcome to the most uncomfortable psychology lesson of your life. Everything you think you know about your own thinking is wrong. Part 2. The two systems that are secretly running your life. Here's something that'll explain every stupid decision you've ever made. Kahneman discovered that you don't actually have one unified mind making your choices. You have two completely different systems that are constantly fighting for control of your behavior. He called them System 1 and System 2, and understanding how they work will horrify you. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, and completely irrational. It makes instant judgments based on feelings, first impressions, and mental shortcuts. It doesn't think, it reacts. It doesn't analyze, it assumes. It doesn't consider alternatives, it jumps to conclusions. System 1 is the part of your brain that decides you don't like someone within seconds of meeting them, that makes you buy things you don't need because they're on sale, that causes you to text your ex at 2 a.m., and that makes you absolutely certain about things you know almost nothing about. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, and requires actual effort. It's the part of your brain that can do math, consider multiple perspectives, weigh evidence, and make genuinely rational decisions. It's what you think of as your mind, the conscious, reasoning part of yourself that you identify with. Here's the problem. System 2 is lazy, easily tired, and only works when you force it to work. Meanwhile, System 1 is always running, making thousands of automatic judgments and decisions without your conscious awareness. Most of your life is actually controlled by System 1, while System 2 occasionally wakes up to create logical-sounding explanations for what System 1 already decided. Think about how you chose your current job, your romantic partner, or where you live. You probably remember carefully weighing the options, making lists of pros and cons, and arriving at a rational decision. But Kahneman's research suggests that System 1 probably made those choices almost instantly based on emotional reactions and unconscious associations, while System 2 worked overtime to create a story about why those choices were logical and well-reasoned. You didn't rationally decide to be attracted to your partner. System 1 made that decision in milliseconds based on unconscious factors you're not even aware of. Then, System 2 created a narrative about compatibility, shared values, and logical reasons why this person makes sense for you. You didn't carefully analyze your career options. System 1 steered you toward opportunities that felt familiar, comfortable, or impressive. Then System 2 constructed explanations about passion, skills, and strategic career planning. This is why you can feel completely confident about decisions that later seem obviously wrong. System 1 made the choice based on incomplete information and emotional reactions, while System 2 created a compelling story about why that choice was smart and well considered. The story felt so true that you believed it completely, but it was just System 2 doing what it does best, rationalizing System 1's automatic responses and making them feel like conscious, deliberate choices. Most of what you think of as your reasoning is actually your rationalization. You're not discovering why you made good choices. You're inventing explanations for choices that were made by mental processes you don't control and barely understand. The truly disturbing part? This is happening constantly, with every decision you make, and you have no idea it's happening because System 2 is so good at creating coherent stories that you actually believe them. You think you're the author of your choices, but you're actually just the narrator of choices made by a part of your mind you don't consciously access. Part 3. The confirmation bias that's destroying your relationship with reality. Here's the cognitive bias that's probably ruining your life right now. Your brain doesn't seek truth. It seeks confirmation of what you already believe, and it's terrifyingly good at finding that confirmation even when it doesn't exist. Confirmation bias is your mind's tendency to notice, remember, and interpret information in ways that confirm your existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing information that contradicts those beliefs. Think about your political opinions. When you encounter news stories, how often do they challenge your existing views versus reinforce them? When you see social media posts, how many make you think exactly versus how many make you genuinely reconsider your position? If you're like most people, you primarily consume information that confirms what you already think. And when you encounter contradictory information, you instinctively look for ways to dismiss it rather than seriously consider it. This isn't conscious bias. It's automatic mental processing that happens before you're even aware you're doing it. Your brain is constantly filtering reality to show you a version that makes your existing beliefs seem obviously correct. It's like wearing glasses that make everything confirm your worldview while making contradictory evidence invisible or distorted. But confirmation bias goes deeper than just information consumption. It affects how you interpret your own experiences and relationships. If you believe your partner doesn't appreciate you, you'll notice every instance where they seem ungrateful while overlooking or minimizing instances where they show appreciation. If you believe your boss doesn't like you, you'll interpret neutral interactions as evidence of hostility while dismissing friendly interactions as fake or manipulative. If you believe you're not good at something, you'll remember your failures vividly while forgetting your successes. If you believe you're very good at something, You'll remember your successes clearly while explaining away your failures as due to external factors. Your brain isn't showing you reality, it's showing you a customized version of reality designed to make your existing beliefs feel true and your self-image feel consistent. This creates a psychological trap where your beliefs become self-reinforcing regardless of whether they're accurate. The more strongly you believe something, the more evidence your brain will find to support that belief, which makes you believe it even more strongly. You end up living in a bubble of self-confirming information that feels like objective reality, but is actually a carefully curated fantasy designed to make you feel right about things you might be completely wrong about. The scariest part is how confident this process makes you feel. The more your brain confirms your existing beliefs, the more certain you become that those beliefs are obviously true and that people who disagree are clearly mistaken, biased, or lying. Meanwhile, people with completely opposite beliefs are experiencing the exact same process with equal confidence. Their brains are also finding plenty of confirmation for their beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. Everyone feels like they're seeing reality clearly while everyone else is deluded. But actually, everyone is seeing a distorted version of reality that's been filtered through their existing beliefs and preferences. You're not exempt from this process just because you're aware of it. Right now, your brain is probably looking for ways to dismiss or minimize this information if it threatens your self-image as a rational person. That's confirmation bias doing exactly what it always does, protecting your existing beliefs about yourself by making contradictory information feel less credible or less relevant. Part 4. The availability heuristic that's making you afraid of the wrong things. Here's a cognitive bias that's probably controlling your fears, decisions, and life choices without you realizing it. Your brain judges how likely or important something is based on how easily you can remember examples of it happening, not on how often it actually happens. Kahneman called this the availability heuristic, and it's why you're probably worried about the wrong things while ignoring the actual risks in your life. Think about what you're most afraid of: terrorism, plane crashes, shark attacks, violent crime, or freak accidents. Now think about what's most likely to actually harm you: heart disease, car accidents, diabetes, depression, or relationship problems. The things you worry about most are probably the things that get the most media coverage, not the things that pose the greatest actual risk to your well-being. Your brain assumes that if you can easily remember examples of something happening, it must happen frequently. If you can't easily remember examples, it must be rare. But this logic is completely backwards in our modern information environment. You can easily remember examples of plane crashes because every single one gets massive media coverage. You can't easily remember examples of successful flights because nobody reports on the 100,000 flights that land safely every day. So your brain concludes that plane crashes are common and flying is dangerous, when flying is actually the safest form of travel ever invented. You can easily remember examples of random violence because every incident gets intense media attention. You can't easily remember examples of peaceful interactions because nobody reports on the millions of strangers who encounter each other every day without incident. So your brain concludes that the world is dangerous and getting worse, when violent crime has actually been declining for decades. This bias doesn't just affect your fears, it affects all your probability judgments and life decisions. You overestimate the likelihood of dramatic, memorable events while underestimating the likelihood of ordinary, forgettable events. You worry about rare, spectacular risks while ignoring common, mundane risks. You might obsess about the possibility of a home invasion while ignoring the much higher probability that you'll injure yourself in a car accident. You might worry about your kids being kidnapped by strangers while not thinking about the much greater risk of them developing anxiety or depression. The availability heuristic also affects how you think about success and failure. You can easily remember stories of people who became overnight successes, won the lottery, or achieved fame and fortune quickly. You can't easily remember stories of people who built success slowly over decades through consistent effort. So your brain concludes that dramatic success is more common than it actually is, leading you to underestimate how much time and effort most achievements actually require. You can easily remember examples of people whose lives were ruined by single bad decisions. You can't easily remember examples of people who recovered from mistakes and setbacks because those stories are less dramatic and memorable. So your brain overestimates how catastrophic failure is and underestimates how resilient people actually are. This bias keeps you afraid of the wrong things, hopeful about the wrong things, and making decisions based on memorable exceptions rather than typical patterns. You're not making choices based on actual probabilities. You're making choices based on what your memory makes seem probable, which is heavily distorted by what gets attention, coverage, and dramatic storytelling. The solution isn't to ignore your instincts entirely, but to recognize when your fears and expectations might be distorted by the availability heuristic, and to consciously seek out base rate information about what actually happens most of the time. Part 5. The sunk cost fallacy that's trapping you in bad decisions. Here's a cognitive bias that's probably keeping you stuck in situations that are slowly destroying your life. Once you've invested time, money, or effort into something, your brain becomes irrationally committed to continuing that investment even when it's clearly not working. Kahneman discovered that humans have a devastating inability to cut their losses. Instead of asking, "What's the best decision going forward?" we ask, "How can I justify the investments I've already made?" This is the sunk cost fallacy, and it's why you stay in jobs you hate, relationships that don't work, and life paths that aren't serving you. Think about your current situation. How much of your life is organized around justifying past decisions rather than making optimal future decisions? Are you staying in your career because it's the best use of your talents and interests, or because you've already invested years in building expertise and don't want to waste that investment? Are you in your relationship because it's genuinely fulfilling and growing, or because you've already invested so much time and emotional energy that starting over feels like admitting failure? Are you living where you live because it's the best place for your current life, or because you've already established roots and moving feels like throwing away everything you've built? The sunk cost fallacy tricks your brain into treating past investments as reasons to continue investing, even when the future prospects are poor. You end up throwing good time after bad time, good money after bad money, and good years after bad years. This happens because your brain hates admitting that previous decisions were wrong. Every time you consider cutting your losses, you're forced to confront the possibility that you've been making suboptimal choices. So instead of facing that discomfort, your brain creates stories about why continuing is logical. I just need to give it more time. I'm so close to making it work. I can't waste everything I've already put into this. These stories feel rational, but they're actually emotional responses to the pain of acknowledging that your past investments haven't paid off. The sunk cost fallacy is particularly vicious because it gets stronger the more you've already invested. The worse your situation becomes, the harder it becomes to leave because the investments you'd be wasting get larger. You stay in a bad job longer because you've already stayed so long. You continue a failing project because you've already put so much work into it. You remain in an unfulfilling relationship because you've already invested so many years. This creates a psychological trap where bad situations become harder to escape the longer they continue. Not because they're getting better, but because the cost of admitting they're not working keeps increasing. Meanwhile, the opportunity cost of staying trapped keeps growing too. Every day you spend justifying past investments is a day you're not making better investments for your future. The person who stays in the wrong career for 10 years doesn't just lose 10 years, they lose the career they could have built during those 10 years. The person who stays in the wrong relationship doesn't just lose that time, they lose the relationship they could have found during that time. Breaking free from the sunk cost fallacy requires a fundamental shift in how you make decisions. Instead of asking, How can I make my past investments pay off? You need to ask, what's the best use of my remaining time, energy, and resources? This doesn't mean becoming impulsive or abandoning everything at the first sign of difficulty. It means honestly evaluating whether your current investments are likely to generate positive returns going forward, regardless of what you've already invested. Sometimes the most rational decision is to cut your losses and redirect your resources toward better opportunities. But your brain will fight this rational choice every step of the way, creating elaborate justifications for why quitting is wasteful and continuing is wise. Understanding the sunk cost fallacy doesn't eliminate it, but it can help you recognize when you're making decisions based on past investments rather than future prospects. Part 6. The overconfidence effect that's making you stupid. Here's the cognitive bias that might be the most dangerous of all. You are dramatically more confident in your knowledge, abilities, and judgments than you have any right to be, and this overconfidence is making you make terrible decisions while feeling great about them. Kahneman discovered that overconfidence isn't just a personality trait that some people have. It's a systematic feature of human psychology that affects everyone, often in proportion to how little they actually know about a subject. The less you know, the more confident you feel. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. This is why experts are often uncertain while amateurs are often certain. Think about subjects you have strong opinions about but limited expertise in: politics, economics, health, psychology, other people's relationships, or complex social issues. How confident do you feel in your opinions? How obvious do your positions seem to you? Now think about subjects where you actually have deep expertise. How much uncertainty do you feel? How aware are you of the complexity, nuance, and areas where experts disagree? If you're like most people, you feel more confident about subjects you know less about. This is backwards, but it's how human psychology works. Your brain generates confidence based on the coherence of the story it can tell about a subject, not based on the accuracy or completeness of your knowledge. The simpler your understanding, the more confident you feel. This overconfidence shows up in every area of life. You overestimate your driving ability. Most people think they're above-average drivers, which is statistically impossible. You probably think you're a safer, more skilled driver than you actually are. You overestimate your social judgment. You probably think you're good at reading people, understanding their motivations, and predicting their behavior. But research shows that even trained psychologists are terrible at these tasks. You overestimate your memory. You probably trust your recollections more than you should. But memory is reconstruction, not replay, and it's constantly being altered by new information and current emotions. You overestimate your reasoning ability. You probably think you're good at logical thinking, objective analysis, and rational decision-making. But you're reading an article about how bad humans are at all of these things. You overestimate your self-knowledge. You probably think you understand your own motivations, preferences, and likely behaviors better than other people understand theirs. But you're subject to the same unconscious biases and self-deception as everyone else. The overconfidence effect is particularly dangerous because it prevents you from seeking better information, considering alternative perspectives, or acknowledging the limitations of your knowledge. When you feel confident about something, you stop investigating it. You stop questioning your assumptions. You stop considering that you might be wrong. You start making decisions based on incomplete information while feeling certain that your information is adequate. This creates a feedback loop where overconfidence leads to poor decisions, but the poor outcomes don't correct the overconfidence because you attribute them to bad luck, other people's mistakes, or circumstances beyond your control rather than to your own overconfident misjudgments. Meanwhile, people who are genuinely knowledgeable often seem uncertain, hesitant, or wishy-washy compared to confident amateurs. So, we end up following the advice and leadership of people who are confident rather than people who are competent. The solution isn't to become paralyzed by uncertainty about everything. It's to calibrate your confidence to your actual knowledge and to actively seek out information that might prove you wrong rather than information that confirms what you already think. But your brain will resist this approach because uncertainty feels worse than false confidence, even when false confidence leads to worse outcomes. Overconfidence feels good. Uncertainty feels bad. So, your brain chooses overconfidence even when uncertainty would lead to better decisions. Part 7. Becoming less wrong. The only rational response to being irrational. After learning about all these ways your brain systematically deceives you, you might be wondering, so how do I become more rational? How do I make better decisions? How do I stop being a victim of my own cognitive biases? Here's Kahneman's paradoxical answer. You can't eliminate cognitive biases, but you can learn to recognize when you're most likely to be biased and create systems that help you make better decisions despite your biased brain. The goal isn't to become perfectly rational. That's impossible for humans. The goal is to become less wrong over time by acknowledging your systematic errors and designing your life to minimize their impact. First, accept that you are biased, overconfident, and frequently wrong about things you feel certain about. This isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of human psychology that affects everyone, including people who study cognitive biases for a living. The people who make the best decisions aren't the ones who eliminate bias. They're the ones who assume they're biased and create processes to double-check their thinking. Second, slow down your decision-making process for important choices. Most cognitive biases happen in System 1, the fast, automatic, emotional part of your brain. You can reduce their impact by forcing System 2, the slow, deliberate, logical part, to engage more often. Before making significant decisions, ask yourself, what information might I be ignoring? What assumptions might I be making? How might I be wrong about this? Third, actively seek out disconfirming evidence. Your brain naturally looks for information that confirms what you already believe. You have to consciously look for information that challenges your existing beliefs, assumptions, and decisions. Ask people you trust to tell you why your idea might be wrong. Read sources that disagree with your political views. Consider why the opposite choice might be better than the one you're leaning toward. Fourth, use outside perspective whenever possible. You're biased about your own situations in ways you can't see, but you can often see other people's biases clearly. Ask yourself, what would I tell a friend who was in this exact situation? Often, the advice you'd give someone else is more rational than the decision you'd make for yourself. Fifth, track your predictions and decision outcomes. Most people never follow up to see whether their confident predictions were accurate or their important decisions worked out well. Start keeping track of what you predicted would happen and what actually happened. This calibration exercise will help you develop more accurate confidence in your judgments over time. Finally, embrace uncertainty as a more honest relationship with reality. The feeling of certainty is often a sign that you're not thinking carefully enough, not that you're thinking clearly. Rational people say, "I don't know," more often than irrational people. They express uncertainty about complex topics. They change their minds when presented with new evidence. This doesn't make them wishy-washy, it makes them accurate. The ultimate insight from Kahneman's research isn't that humans are hopelessly irrational. It's that humans are predictably irrational in ways that can be understood and partially corrected. You can't fix your brain, but you can work around its limitations. You can't eliminate bias, but you can reduce its impact on your most important decisions. The first step is giving up the comforting illusion that you're already rational and accepting the uncomfortable reality that you're systematically biased in ways you don't recognize. That acceptance isn't depressing, it's liberating. Once you stop trusting your automatic judgments completely, you can start making decisions more deliberately. And deliberate biased decisions are usually better than automatic biased decisions. If this exploration of cognitive biases has made you question your own thinking, that's exactly the right response. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom is the beginning of better decisions. Your brain will always be insane. But now you know it's insane, which makes you slightly less insane than people who think their brains are perfectly rational. That's progress. Next week, we're exploring Machiavelli's insights into power and why nice people finish last while psychopaths run the world. Subscribe now, because understanding the dark psychology of power might explain every frustrating hierarchy you've ever encountered. Your journey toward less wrong thinking is just beginning, and Kahneman's insights are your guide to making better decisions despite having a fundamentally biased brain.